Evening. Welcome to Overview and Scrutiny in November. Nice to see you all again. I think some colleagues will be joining us later. They've been somewhat delayed. A couple of announcements before we start. I want to take an opportunity to thank Councillor Stephen Cawley for his previous work on this committee and wish him well in his new one. And I would want to wish the new councillor Barry Gardner, Chapman, Barry Chapman. Barry Gardner's good, yeah. Anyway, he's excellent. Lovely chap when he arrives. So welcome to Barry when he arrives. But without further ado, let's crack on with the agenda. Apologies.
So we don't have any apologies for this evening.
Okay. And minutes of the previous.
So within your packs, you've had the minutes of the meeting on the 2nd of October. Is there any comments or observations, or are you happy for the chair to sign those?
Members' interests.
Obviously, you've all had time to read the agenda through. Are there any interests that members would like to declare on any of the items this evening at this point? No?
Overview and scrutiny work programme.
So within your pack, obviously, again, you've got the work programme and notice of key decisions at the moment. Obviously, we're going through a period of self-scrutiny at the moment and developing the work programme as part of that, so that will come at a later point in time. But if there's any questions on the items within the agenda at the moment, happy to take any questions on that. If not, we can pick up the future planning within the self-scrutiny session. If anybody has any questions on the papers within the pack. No?
Okay, thank you. Item 4, questions arising from the previous meeting.
So this is just simply to note the answers to some of the questions that were outstanding from a previous meeting, which I think Councillor Jennings had observed on the last meeting. So they hopefully would be answered now, unless you're about to tell me otherwise. Maybe you might.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Becky, for those. That was they're very helpful picking up those ones. I don't know whether to raise it now or to wait until Councillor Ferguson is on, but I'll have my perennial same questions that I seem to ask every time we get to the performance report, but I never seem to get the answer back afterwards, which are the ones, do you want them now or do you want them later?
Sorry. I don't mind. It's up to you. If you'd like me to note them at this point, or we can note them within the item, because it may be that Councillor Ferguson. Yeah. Okay.
So the questions are they're on PI 22, which is about areas of that are sampled for waste accumulation, etc. And it was how many areas are sampled. Because it's just a percentage that's given, and how is weed accumulation defined? And the other question was on PI 32, which is a question about, I think, staff turnover. And last year it had been measured on a cumulative basis, and then this year it was measured on a monthly basis, which gave a very spiky graph. And I just wondered why that had changed.
Sure, we'll pick that up with Councillor Ferguson later, if that's okay. Item 5, corporate performance report. Councillor Ferguson.
So thank you, Chair. To start off, I'd say that both the points that Councillor Jennings has repeatedly made are very sensible, and I think it's things we have to address. I think, John, you're going to take away those. Thank you. So we've had complaints in the past that this report has been overwhelmingly green, and there's a bit more colour on this one. So there's a few more ambers and a few more reds, which gives us a chance to discuss some things, I think. Some of those are seasonal variations. So PI3, which is one leisure facilities missions, is probably it's amber currently, but it's one of those things we'll pick up in January with all the New Year's resolutions. PI4 and PI5. PI4 is just about amber, but should, very close to being red. Both of those, again, about DFGs, we talk about every time. We established a task and finish group in February of this year, and we've yet to hear back from those. So I've taken that up with the chair of the other ONS committee. Was there news about that, John? Has that been paused, did you say? Sorry.
So that is currently on pause, but the reason for that is that we've been doing some work with the officer corps. So we've been doing work with the business analyst who's been doing a full review of that service. I'm meeting with that business analyst on Friday this week. So the release of that work should be triggering the task and finish group recommencing, and then having some ammunition to look through, which I think will be really useful. Be focused information for them to take away and really work their way through. So in the background, things have been happening.
Sorry, can I just clarify what were the main issues there, John?
So I'll know more on Friday, but the report here highlights a couple of things. So some is around properties which are home places for people properties. And for them, there's a turnaround issue in terms of making changes around disabled facilities grants. They don't have a corporate standard around how quickly that work is done. So sometimes it's about timing of physical work by contractors, sometimes it's relating to the occupants of those properties, and sometimes it's actually about vacant properties and access to them via places for people. So there's a number of factors there. We've also been looking at other delays that exist in the system, and this is a process that involves multiple parts of the public sector. So for example, occupational therapy, make an assessment of the resident and their needs. It's also means tested. So there's also a clarification required about the person's income and funding for themselves. Those are all key blockers in the process. They're what statute tells us to do, but we think we can make them more efficient, and I will definitely get some more from the BA who's been looking at that activity for me this week.
So, and that's an important one because it actually affects real people's lives, because obviously people waiting for a long time to have their houses adapted, so it is of critical importance. Something else which is also important is council tax, average days to process new claims for housing benefits was dipped into the amber but will be green on outturn, so I'm confident that's just a blip. And council tax collection rate, which is showing red, but that's kind of just a cyclical thing, and I think our targets are linear in that, the council tax collection changes throughout the financial year, and I think that's one that will be back on target and be green by the end of the year, so I'm not too concerned about that. PI10, which was the number of households in temporary accommodation, had shown a worrying increase last time, and that's back in the green, but I want to make the point that we're very vulnerable to that, because I think our excellent performance last year was largely due to the number of new social homes we brought online. That number is also dipping, and if those are largely outside of our control, if we can't move people on from temporary accommodation, then the numbers will increase, and that has disastrous consequences both for the people themselves and financially for the council. And the other ones I wanted to talk about basically is the ones related to household waste. PI 18, percentage of household waste used recycled, composted. PI 20, residual waste collected per household, and PI 21, number of missed bins. Now, obviously, some of these have been affected by the introduction of the garden waste subscription service. PI 21 looks much worse than usual, but in fact, when you look at the context of our overall performance, is not too awful. So the waste team collects about 6 million bins per year. Our corporate target for missed bins is equivalent to 57 missed bins per 100,000 collections. So it's really quite a small number, or 99.43%. And our target, which I think we're confident of achieving, is missing less than a 1 in 1,000 bins. So I think that's obviously when you rearrange a big logistical operation like collecting bins, any change will have an effect, and we're seeing those effects then. And I think the other one that needs also some context is the residual waste collected per household. So we set our target at 354 kilograms per household. If you look at the average across all other councils, they set theirs at 510. So although we have collected a bit more residual waste because we're not having food waste put in the green bins anymore, it's going into the black bins, we're still substantially better than many other councils. Those are the only ones I was going to note. John, do you have any extra?
Just one extra bit of colour really on that temporary accommodation statistic. So we're holding fairly steady actually in the district. It's on, yeah, hopefully you can hear me, yes, apologies. On the TA numbers, temporary accommodation, we're holding fairly steady. The national trend is actually for increases. Most local authorities are seeing 10, 15, 20% increase in their TA use across the country. So whilst we're holding steady, our performance actually compared to many is actually pretty good. Final context, I've been at a conference today and met other colleagues, some London boroughs. I've got over 4,000 families in temporary accommodation. We've got 130 odd, so impactful absolutely for those individuals. We work hard to support them, but national context I think is quite relevant on that particular metric. But nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm very pleased you actually raised that before I open it to the floor, because obviously in St Ives, we actually house quite a few homeless people, and it's very much a question on everyone's mind about, you know, how we actually support homelessness people, and I too picked up the increase and the impact it's actually having on finances as well. Are there any other questions? Sure.
It's a severe problem, isn't it? We don't, temporary accommodation isn't great for anybody, but it's better than homelessness. And the way that there's two ways we can deal with that. One is bringing on more social housing so we can move people out of temporary accommodation. And the other way is stopping people getting into homelessness in the first place, which is a major focus of the service. And so we try to intervene and help people wherever we can so they stay in their homes and don't end up in temporary accommodation places, which are never ideal. But it's not always possible, but that's kind of the focus of the service.
Absolutely. I recognise all staff do their absolute best to try and help people on. Councillor Chapman, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, my apologies. We had a traffic incident on the way. I'm desperately trying to catch up and trying to find the item we're dealing with on the agenda. I don't know if you'd enlighten me. We're straight into item 5. I didn't realise I was quite that quite that late. Okay, thank you. That was all I needed to ask.
Are there any other? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I will go back to PI 21, if I may. Councillor Ferguson said you're confident of making this missed bin target. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned that when you look at the graph, we're moving further away from that red line each month, and we're halfway through the year now. And September was 388 bins missed. August was 354. So even in the short term, it seems to be increasing. And to get to that year-end forecast of 360, that means for the next 6 months, we're going to have to average 196 bins, which seems a very, very challenging target to make that, given that's half the number of bins in pretty much every month, apart from June, that's been achieved so far. So I wonder whether you could just explain why you're confident that's going to come back on quite a sharp incline back to get underneath that line.
Yes, I can. So I completely agree, actually. When officers went through this, we had the same concerns and questions about that performance and about how we can bring it back on track. So I picked that up with the operations manager, Andy Rogan, and he's taking me through some of the tasks and activities that are doing with the service. So daily briefings, real top quality focus on the performance of the teams and the crews. Each crew is benchmarked. Each crew's performance is fed back to them. They are pushing harder and harder than they've ever done, I think, on this particular metric. Andy's view is they can bring it back. I think my challenge to him is to make sure that that happens. I think we've got to give them the space to do that. And the feedback he gave me was, what I need to give my teams, my crews, is a really tough, hard, stretching target. And he wants to maintain that level of standard from them. So he's pushing as hard as he can from that operational space. It is one we're keeping a very close eye on, because I agree, it is a fair old challenge that they're taking on. But 6 months in the year, they've decided to keep that stretch target to push as hard as they can. We give them the space to do that. But absolutely, this is monitored every month by us as a key metric.
And just for, I think, our benefit, are most of the bins that are being missed green bins, or are they split across all three?
It's a split, so there's no particular focus on any particular type. It's related to lots of factors, really. Crews, cycle, who's in, who's not. Potentially on day to day, we make operational choices about which crews go to which site, but again, each is briefed really hard by their team leader, so there's no particular trend on the nature of the bin that's missed. It is just a factor across all of the collection types.
We also had some turnover in staff, so there was some sickness and some new agency staff coming online, which also affected it as well. So it's not only to do with the green bin subscription service, but obviously that's a contributing factor.
Councillor Blackwell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'm sorry, I must emphasise that I was quite disappointed about the production of this report in respect of, I've read more than once, column on page 55, middle column, following Ollie's departure, and I wouldn't expect a report to be presented to this committee saying that. I would expect full name and position. So I'm quite disappointed on that. There's several abbreviations without RAI, COAH, DFG. I have no idea what these mean. And again, no courtesy of a first full description. Also, a raft of spelling mistakes. I was even Googling words that don't exist because the delivery was poor. So I'm sorry, it does look glossy, but whoever put it together should have, I feel, should have read it and delivered to the standards we'd expect.
Thank you. Apologies for the spellings and for those typos. I'll take that feedback and push that in the team to try to avoid that in future. So apologies.
And we also need to move away from abbreviations, because it's difficult enough to read a report like this, and like none of it. So, well, we're more experts than people, residents are, but any member of the public picking up this report would find it difficult to understand. So that's a point well made. Thank you.
I agree. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just a comment initially, just potential inaccuracies. I don't think there's anything behind them, just potentially a couple of errors. So, for example, PI 19 on page 53 shows that the predicted outturn at the end of the year is going to be red. But then if you have a look in the graphs, it says the predicted or the forecast outturn is green. So which one is it would be quite useful to know. Don't expect it here today, obviously. And then the other one is on one of the graphs to do with planning. The number next to the line on the graph shows that it's 90 point something %, but it still looks like it's 100%. Obviously, we can interpret where that sits on the graph, but just useful to change before it goes to cabinet and before the next time this comes around to us. And then only the two questions that I've got is to do with PI 24, which is the number of enforcement actions taken on fly tips. Completely understand that there have been 2 cases that have been adjourned, and obviously that's going to impact where we are this quarter. What would be useful is to find out why those 2 cases were adjourned. Were they because from our side, or was it a request from the people that we're trying to prosecute? Just so because if it's that we've got a lack of evidence going into these court cases, then that's an issue. But if it's that they've asked for the adjournment, then that, we have no say in that whatsoever. And then the other one is PI, well, it's 31 and 32 to do with staff. Obviously, we take the care of our staff very seriously, and obviously our staff do a fantastic job. But it is not very good to see long-term sickness staying as high as it is, and the staff turnover being, again, as high as it has been over the last few months. So it'd be useful just to find out what is the organisation doing to look into this, and obviously with the change in the government and workers' rights from day one, it's important that we're on top of this whilst those rules aren't in place, so that when those rules are in place, we're able to jump on things quickly, because the last thing that we want is long-term sickness to spike in the coming years or months and years. Thank you, Chair.
So in terms of specifics on the 2 court cases, I'm just unsighted on that this evening, so I can take that away and investigate as to what the causes of that might be. As you say, it could be multiple options around that. In terms of the sickness, long-term sickness is always a tricky one, isn't it? Because that's where it's a period of more than 28 days. Those can be for a number of reasons, from quite serious matters, health matters for individual members of staff, to other concerns as well. I think we talked before previously in this meeting, and I know at Employment Committee as well, they cover the nature of sickness for some of our staff, and some of the operational roles that we do have can trigger long-term sickness cases. So operations crews, for example, can get serious injuries and so on. Look at it very often. In terms of how we deal with that, we've got an active process for management of that. Set of triggers exist. And then there's a 3-stage process where the member of staff is taken through pretty quickly, actually. And the 3rd stage is the actual dismissal of that member of staff over that sickness if they're incapable of delivering their work due to ill health. Very rarely we take that step, because thankfully we get most people back to work, but it does exist. Personally, I know it does exist because I've held those hearings and dismissed members of staff as a consequence. So there are steps in place, there are control processes around it. It is just the nature sometimes of a large workforce with multiple needs and the occasional quite serious illness, which we do support our members of staff really well on. We're really keen to get them back to work because we know we need them to be productive across the organisation. So steps are in place. It is something we also do pay active measurements to. As you say, you get it every quarter. I get this every month to go through as well with operational teams.
Sorry, Jay, can I come back on that last point? No, that's fantastic, and it's good to hear that those processes are in place. I know the Employment Committee look at this as well. What I think would have been useful is to have some of that within the commentary, because it is currently read. Even if you just say the majority, four of this 5.6 is long-term serious illness, it just puts our mind at ease, because we're still seeing it as read. But if that commentary is there, just to let us know, we don't expect personal information to be given away, but if you can say that the large majority of these are long-term serious illnesses, then I think we'll sit there and understand and reflect and think there's not an issue here. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Howe.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Martin actually raised one of my issues on PI 19 regarding the red and green status. The other one is regarding, again, PI 19, is the commentary on the service. Do the totals are supposed to add up to the total that's on the graph? Or should that be a different figure in those commentaries? Because it doesn't.
Sorry, I'll take that away. That doesn't make sense to me either. When I've read it through, I would agree. I would imagine the year-to-date total should aggregate up to 182 kilograms per person, which it doesn't. So apologies, I don't understand that either, but I'll take that away.
Thank you, John. Councillor Gardner.
I know, greedy. Thank you very much, Chair. With regard to 47, rural pilot for EV charging, we don't seem to be getting very far to the point where we're actually going to start putting EV chargers out into the rural areas. I wonder if you can give us an update with regard to that, because when I was first consulted with regard to that particular project, I was given the impression that the administration was going to get these EV charging points out very much quicker than we seem to be actually doing. You know, if we want people to change to electric vehicles, especially in the rural areas, we need to find places where they can actually charge if they have not got driveways, you know, because you can't have cables across footpaths and everything else. So I just wonder when we are likely to see the first charging points rolled out in the rural locations, because it just seems to me that we're bogged down at the moment from this commentary in here with regard to the legal work and everything else, but I might be mistaken. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So that's at a level of detail I don't have at my fingertips. I think the update's reasonable in terms of the visits being undertaken, feasibility works going, looking at electrical supply and that legal activity. It does miss a date, and I think that's a fair challenge for me to take back and just get that update in terms of deliverability. I suppose the response back, I guess, is also this is Q2. We've got a full year on this within the corporate plan, but you do need some timescales to sit around that. I'd hope it's not the 31st of March.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. It may be that I've my time away has meant that I've missed a couple of things, but I found it very confusing, not only with the acronyms that appeared all over the place in this report, but the use of terms such as deliberative democracy and community wealth, which there doesn't appear to be any ready definition of those terms. They are put in quotation marks as though they're a sort of quite a nice esoteric term. But I wonder if you could just tell me what those two things mean, please. Sorry to put you on the spot, but they're all over this report, and there's no explanation. Yes.
Thank you for that. I have a colleague. I have an understanding of that, but Councillor Ferguson.
You might want to review the corporate plan, Councillor Chapman. It's full of those kind of words.
With the greatest respect, Chair, I expected in the report to have a definition of any terms that are in quotation marks, not to have to go searching for it in another document.
Well, it's part of what this council does. It's our ambition, Councillor Chapman. So if you're not familiar with the ambition, then I think that you need to make yourself familiar with it. And I think it's impossible to describe every single term in a report every quarter. This is a regular report, and we're supposed to be monitoring the metrics rather than worrying too much about language. But I do take your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. John, do you want to thank you?
Yeah, thank you. Another thing that may help as well is that the Community Health and Wealth Building Strategy, which is what the report is about, has recently been approved by Cabinet. So there'll be some papers there that will give you further information. The strategy's there as well for you to have a look through. So that will give you some support. And outside the meeting, really happy to brief you through that and take you through it.
Are you happy with that?
The point really is that reports which are in the public domain should have that information, and whether or not I would go searching for it as a councillor is not the point. We shouldn't expect residents to read through all council documentation to find a definition of something that's contained in a singular report. I have actually read through this took me a day or two, and I have many questions on here. Now, I don't know how long your meetings would be, or how long, whether or not there's a comfort break point arranged at some time, but I'd like to at least go through some of them.
Thank you. I take your point. I think Councillor Blackwell actually has raised some of the issues about the use of acronyms, and I think the point's taken. Obviously, I think John will take that away, because I think you make a valid point, because you can't expect members of the public to actually understand what these issues are. So I think we can take that away and do something with that. If you have another question, we're happy to take that.
As I say, Chair, I have many questions. If you're limiting me to one, then I'm spoilt for choice here. Before I get to my question, I would also like to say that it's all very well having directions of travel and latest status, but it would be helpful if we knew what the previous status was against there, because it could be that we've had amber for several quarters and it's not drawn to our attention. So that would be quite helpful to have. No, it isn't. It's not. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So the way that we report is each quarterly report has its direction of travel from previous meeting, but all the previous reports are published as well. So by working our way through those, we can see that focus over time. So I think the critical thing for this meeting is movement within quarters, and particularly when we get to Q4 at the end of the year, that's when the absolute performance is measured against the objectives we set for the entire year. So hopefully that gives some feeling for kind of how we monitor change over time.
Is that helpful? No. Right. If you do you have a list of a lot of, because I tend to want to make sure other people can ask questions as well. If you would like another question, yes.
I think it would be helpful if short and long-term sickness was actually identified separately in these reports, because if there's a particular long-term sickness which is skewing the overall performance indicator, then that should really be brought to our attention, I think.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So for clarification, PI30 is short-term staff sickness, PI31 is long-term, they're separate. Long-term sickness is a period of over 28 days, short-term sickness is a different qualifying criteria, so the data is separated and aggregated out for your attention.
I recognise that obviously you're new to this and it's actually coming in, so certainly feel free to ask some extra questions that will provide some clarity if we can. In the meantime, are there any other questions from any other members at the moment? Okay. Councillor Katner.
Get the middle one. So I'm colourblind, so I can't see these things. Thank you very much, Chair. It was just a minor formatting issue, but PI32, why does the line vanish off the top of the graph? Doesn't need fixing now. I've raised this issue about I can't see the lines by colour, but suddenly one vanishes off the top.
That's just poor formatting by officers. So along with many other bits of feedback, I'll be taking that back to the team. It's just that the data point is above where the graph's been set. So apologies for that.
Thank you, John. Councillor Chapman, did you have some more questions that you?
I have loads of them, Chair, but I get the impression that I might not be welcome to ask these all evening. Yeah, I've got a question here on the. This is on page 47. Is it 47 or 17? 47 is the big number, 17 is the small one on this page. And item number 31 regarding the future High Street projects in St Neots. And I wondered whether or not this is regarded as including the master plan funding that the council holds.
So the Market Town programme is a basket of projects, therefore it's described as a programme. It covers all sorts of activity, so it covers the work in Ramsey, it covers the work that we're doing in St Ives, Cromwell Museum as well within Huntingdon, shopfront grant scheme, as well as digital information screens and a number of other projects. It does include that master planning activity as well.
Chair, I believe, John, it includes the 3.1 million which was deferred from the bridge, fired from the bridge money, but there's the further £1 million which is the legacy funding, and I wondered how that was being dealt with, if it was being dealt with separately.
Yeah, Chair, I think at the next ONS meeting, you have an update on the Market Towns programme from the portfolio holder, Councillor Wakeford, and I think those questions would be better asked of him.
John, did you want to briefly say anything on that?
So I think that's fair. My job today is to try and report across 30 metrics, 70 odd corporate actions and about 15 or 16 projects. Detail is quite difficult to surface on some of those. Councillor Ferguson's absolutely right. The next meeting will contain a full report on the entire Market Towns programme, so there'll be an opportunity to dive into detail with the accountable officers who are delivering that work, and also Councillor Wakeford as well. So hopefully that gives the opportunity for much greater analysis on that particular item.
Yes, we are due an update on all the Market Towns next month.
The £1 million that I'm referring to, which the District Council holds, is not part of the Market Town funding, and I wanted to raise that so that it was quite clear. There was 4.1 million left allocated by the CPCA to the master plan, 3.1 million related to the bridge project, which was vied into the Future High Street Fund. The governance of the other 1 million is somewhat different, and I just wanted to ensure that you were aware of that and find out what your knowledge was of it. Thank you.
I think actually to that extent, Pam Scott will be the programme manager who's coming back next month, and Pam actually will have all the detail in terms of the funding streams and where we actually are on that, and I'll make sure that she is aware that you would like that information, if that's okay for next month.
Thank you for your offer, Chair, but I've already met with Sam Wakeford and Pam Scott and discussed this.
Okay, and hopefully they'll be coming back with some answers for you on that. Are there any other questions, Councillor?
As I was going to be under so much pressure to come up with all these, or given so much time to... the cycleways in the Riverside Park, there's been tremendous local concern about the number of trees that have been, not Riverside Park, Regatta Meadow, that have been cut down on Regatta Meadow. And I wondered if there was any explanation to this. I'm referring to item 57 on page 53.
John.
Again, apologies. I can't give an instant update on the nature of those trees and what's happened to them within the meeting. If Becky'd like to minute that, I can take that away and come back with a specific response around that.
I think actually, obviously, a lot of the detail, you can ask the questions and John can take them away and actually bring it back to next month's meeting for anything like that, or we can submit some questions separately to officers if that's helpful. Are there any other questions from members? Okay. Can we move on then to item 6, finance? Thank you very much, Councillor Ferguson. Thank you, John.
Just whilst we're waiting for the councillor to come to the table, I was just going to make you aware it's rather warm in here this evening, and I'd like to let you know that facilities have turned the temperature down, but it'll take a little while to impact.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this evening is the update on the finance report. As always with finance, I'm delighted that I have the subject matter experts in the room. Even if one of them is looking for the other. I believe it is Suzanne's first report from the finance point of view this evening. I will allow her to introduce herself in a little bit more detail. What I will do first is just to cover that normally what has happened prior to an overview and scrutiny session is that I would have met with Councillor Jennings to go through the reports, and he would have checked through and asked any questions that were pertinent according to the report. Unfortunately, this time round, we've not been able to get the times to align because half term was a week later, and this meeting is a little bit earlier. Entirely my fault. We've just not been able to do so. What we have tried to arrange, Suzanne and myself have to discuss this. We're going to ask the executive support team to ensure that we have those meetings in the diary for the year ahead, so that we know what those are available. And what will be able to happen then is that Councillor Jennings will be able to give separate scrutiny with a detailed range of questions in order to make sure that we're being kept on our toes adequately. In the meantime, what it might mean is that this evening there are a few more questions around the finance side of things as a result, however. I'm delighted to hand over across to Suzanne.
Good evening, and thank you very much for that. Yes, Suzanne Jones, I think I was present at Council where most of you were there. I've been here now a whole 5 weeks. So whilst I'm here presenting this evening, clearly some of the detail rests in my team, and always happy to take away those detailed questions and provide some answers afterwards. But clearly this was a topic that I've been, as you would imagine, very interested in, to see where we were standing at Q2. And actually, I came in just at the end of Q1 as well, and had an informal catch-up with senior leadership team, so I was familiar with some of the proposals around using the overspend that was being reported at that point in time. So clearly you do have a very detailed report in front of you, and overall the service forecast underspend of 1.95 million is compared to 2.1 at the end of Q1, so that's slightly lower. So you could say it's a worsening outcome of 190,000, or actually we're using more funds and doing more things with it. And as you would expect, when you get to the halfway point in the year, you're clearer about some of the things than you were at the first quarter of the year. And you will be obviously aware that we've now passed the end of Q3, so that work is being further done now to make sure that we remain well managed for the rest of the year. As is ever the case with these things, it's a basket of some things being better than we expected and some things being worse than we expected. But overall, things are well monitored in my view, and being calibrated on a regular basis. I can comment on the fact that what was agreed as the use of the underspend that was there at Q1 can still be adequately accommodated within the overall forecast, and there is good work being done and some strong management around making sure that those things that were agreed later in the year are going to be delivered during the course of the year. So clearly, if all of that comes to pass, we should still be in a healthy position by the year end, with a slight underspending in terms of the overall revenue budget. I'll move on briefly to capital then. Capital is always something tricky to predict or to forecast with a great deal of pinpoint accuracy in any organisation that I have been in, and there's been a marginal increase at Q2 to a predicted underspend overall of 1.2 million compared to 1 million at the end of the first quarter. The main in-year underspends relate to Hinchinbrook Country Park improvements, some of the IT projects, some of which
have underspent, some of which may or may not come out. But again, those things are notoriously difficult to be absolutely pinpoint accurate with. A bit of underspend on the vehicle fleet, and that's arisen because we're actually using the vehicles for a bit longer. So again, that's actually some positive. There's still further work to do on some of the other projects, but what I've asked for is that for Q3 we take a good firm look at where we are, because clearly it has an impact on our minimum revenue provision, which is the money we have to set aside to recognise that we've spent capital, and clearly that impacts on the revenue budget. So those were the main points, Chair, that I wanted to bring to your attention, and I hope that's what you were expecting. And between us, we're happy to try and answer questions. And if they're questions I don't have the detail to, along with the previous item, I'm more than happy to take them away and provide some answers afterwards.
Thank you for that. Very welcome. Open to the floor. Are there any questions? Councillor Blackwell.
Sorry, apologies. Thank you. My question relates to Appendix 1, page 133. You refer to places for people and a site, but I don't know which site this relates to. The overall comment is not concerning pest control.
Thank you for that, Councillor Blackwell. I'm sorry I don't have that level of detail in my head, but I'm happy to take that away. I don't know whether that's a misaligning in the lining up or whether or not it's a combination of both things around the community resilience, because I think there might be separate issues. Or it might be that things have moved as we've transitioned something from the housing association places for people. But I'll take that away and get a thorough explanation for you.
Councillor
Thank you very much, Chair. And firstly, just like to take the opportunity to welcome Suzanne to her place. It's really good to have you on this council, and I'm sure we're working productively, not only on this panel, but just across the whole chamber with you when it comes to our finances. And also a thank you to both of yourself and to the executive member for listening to our request at the last meeting to remove these extra funded projects from the actual statements themselves and having them separately, so it's easier to understand what the actual underspend, overspend, whatever it may be, is, and what you're planning on doing moving forward. It just makes it a bit easier to read and fully understand. My first question is to Suzanne, just based on something that you just said that you read out. You said that the Q1 outturn was an underspend of 1.2 million. But I've just looked back in the reports from last time, and it seemed odd when you said it that the outturn last time was an underspend of 1.4 million, not a 2.1 million. So I just want to make sure which one is correct, because something's not right there. Thank you.
Are you referring to the capital, Councillor Martin?
Revenue.
I will have to double check that and come back to you, but I thought the figures I'd been given here were correct from the briefing, but I will double check that back.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Little bit of a scratch record, but can I ask via you, Chair, whether or not the £1 million that I referred to earlier on has been included within the budget figure? And if it has, then we actually have an overspend for the year. You may want to give me a reply to that.
Are you referring to the market town or just generally?
Not the market towns, but I believe it may be being treated as though it is in the market towns, and it's actually CPCA money, which HDC is a custodian of, but not if it's in the budget, it represents an overspend.
So, no, I'll pick that one up. So, I mean, we're going to a level of detail there, which of course would be then rolled over from a previous year. It would be a financial accounting query, this one. So what would need to be done is we need to get the financial controller to backdate through and to work out into which account line, into which reserved fund, or into which pot, for lack of a better word, that has been placed into, and therefore what the status of it is. So it's a level of detail that we just wouldn't be able to bring here, but we will take away and ensure that an answer is confirmed.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair, and also welcome Suzanne, and thanks, I guess, to Sharon, who I guess put the report together in her usual great degree of detail that actually negates me from answering too many questions, despite Councillor Mickleburn's kind offer to take them. But at the risk of incurring your wrath, Chair, I have 4, if I may. but they're brief. No, indeed. Well, I was waiting to see if anybody else wanted to go before me. Shall I take a couple then? Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. On the covering page, dealing with how the underspend is going to be spent, there was just something that was slightly confusing to me, that £100,000 was being put towards, this is on page 121 of the report, £100,000 was going to be spent on the contribution to the increased MERV contract, 6 months. Yet later in the report, there is an underspend because the MERV contract was signed late. I was just slightly confused why we were taking an underspend in one place and then effectively, because that underspend moves into the total underspend, and then allocating it back to the MERV contract, and didn't know whether...
I think, but I will clarify, that goes back to the point that Councillor Martin made earlier, which was we were asked to split it out. So that's why it's there. So it's not been accounted for twice. It's actually showing how it was applied, and then it's accounted for in the overall accounts. But let me get Sharon to check that for you and come back to you.
My second question, thank you, Chair. This is about the very useful miscellaneous debt table on page 124. And I guess this was a question I probably would have been asking to Sharon, was she here, is what steps are being taken to try and recover the over 365-day debt, which has pleasingly come down from £1 million in the last report, the first time that we saw it aged out, to 824,000, but particularly in the areas of the 3C shared services, which is about £150,000, the commercial rent 107, and the housing 345. I understand that the SIL is slightly different, so I'm less worried about that number. Sorry, so the question really was, what are there any new steps that are being taken to try and recover these debts?
I actually had a team meeting with the finance team today, as it happened, and that's one of the things that I actually raised in terms of what we're doing around that debt. So it's something I want to take some time to have a further look into. So you've actually picked on something that I'd picked on as well in having a look first off. So I think there's work to be done, and I've asked to go through that with the team so that we can agree what I would like the next steps to be as the person responsible for finance. So with your permission, when we come back, I'll the next time around, I'll hopefully be able to give you some more, or if there's anything particular, then I'll share that in advance.
Are there any other questions? Well, Councillor Morton.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just moving to table 3.2, so summary of revenue by services under corporate resources. It says under the expenditure on the right-hand column that there's additional national insurance costs, but also later on it says that there's been reduced salary costs. Now, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any increases to NI up to this stage. I know there has been from next year onwards, so it's just useful to try and find out why we're having extra national insurance costs when salaries have gone down.
Thank you for that. Actually, I did pick up one of the questions I was going to actually address was the the salaries, the underspend in salaries as well. I picked that one up.
So I think that is down to our computer error. And that was down to the national insurance changes, because we had 3 changes last year. And I think that what is the explanation there is that it's more that it was the computer error than a national insurance change, but it was a national insurance act change that caused the computer error. And that was the one that last time we talked about that being swept into the finance pot, so that individual budgets didn't have to suffer that hit as a result. And I think that it's just a wording there that looks a little bit unfortunate to me.
Okay. Actually, obviously, following on from that, I did notice within planning an underspend in salaries. Obviously, it's a little concerning with planning services, and I was just wondering whether that was just a temporary blip. But I can perhaps take that up with the portfolio holder on that matter. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my next question really is on page 142, and it's about the capital programme and the budget for civil parking enforcement, which up until last quarter had been sat at £378,000, and it's now gone up to £1,030,000 as forecast. So it's tripled. I see there is a 100,000 contribution in the funding page a couple of pages later. But I just wondered how we could get the costs of that civil parking so wrong. I guess this is a question, perhaps is a policy question for the Executive Council, but also how long do we think we're going to be able to recoup those capital costs once civil parking is in?
So I remember that one coming through one of the other overview and scrutinies. And at that point, the detail had always been sort of estimated. I think what's happened is that from memory, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, but there was the condition of the lines and signs was far worse than we were expecting. And as a result, the amount of capital being put in to continue with CPE was increased. So it went to that, I think it was £750,000 is the number that immediately comes to mind. There's too many numbers that fly around with these things. Now that went through the overview and scrutiny process and came back through to Cabinet and was then approved. And I think everybody was in favour of civil parking continuing because it's considered to be an important something that I think residents are asking for. I think everyone around the overview scrutiny table at the time agreed. I don't know the exact detail as to why we're sitting at that capital number now. Because it goes beyond the £750,000. However, I think it's one we'll just have to take away just to get the fine detail on how we're nudging into that slightly higher number.
Just to clarify, the CPE goes through the other panels, so I can obviously send you the papers, but obviously if I perhaps liaise with Sharon and Councillor Mickelborough on that for you.
Thank you, Chair. My final one is a very brief point, actually. It's on page 126, and it's about the properties in the properties that are currently vacant in the investment strategy. And it says that there are 22 vacant properties at the moment, but when it's split by the town, those numbers only add up to 20. And so perhaps I wondered if it could come back about where the missing 2 were.
We'll have the subject matter expert sitting at the table in a few moments' time, so maybe we'll pick that question up then.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. You'll get to learn the name eventually, Chair. I noticed that there's a saving, various savings for salaries, some of which are services for which we're saving salaries for things like CCTV, which is a service which is partially paid for by the market towns and other places where they have CCTV. And I wondered how we were saving salaries, because as far as I'm aware, the people whose salaries we would be saving would be those that are actually monitoring the CCTV. So I'd be rather concerned if we were saving salaries in that situation, because it means that we're not actually providing the service.
So some of these savings are almost by accident. So if you have a member of staff who leaves and recruitment doesn't complete before a new member of staff comes in, you would have a salary saving because you'll have a month where there is somebody, for example, who's just not being paid a salary at that point. Sometimes that will lead to a decrease in service. Generally, what will tend to happen is that the officers will look to either fill that through overtime or would look to fill that through agency staffing. And that can be some of the problems with some of the aspects of the financial reports. Sometimes you'd need to show a saving in salaries. Other times you'd then show an overage in temporary staffing. And the two are budgeted for separately and are reported on separately. So it's not a deliberate attempt to save. It is almost by accident that a saving has occurred.
I will look, but I presume there's an overage figure that counters that for overtime being more expensive than a full-time staff or agency staff. Then there's been nothing, the reports that are sent to those that subscribe to for CCTV who pay at least half the cost of CCTV. Those reports haven't said anything at all about any impact on the service. So there must be rather than a saving there must be an overspend somewhere else in the report, I presume.
So again, from a finance point of view, finance needs to be about good governance, about the processes of making sure that finances are well managed and that budgets are being allocated and spent accordingly. Equally, what you don't want is your finance team being in charge of the operations of the team. So we need to be saying to the managers within the delegated governance function of running their budget, here is the amount of money that's been put in. It is up to them to ensure that the service is where it is, that the quality of what is being produced is where it is at. And the panel should be holding those service accounts and the portfolio holders to account for exactly that. So we've had, and I can pick on the executive member because he's sitting in the room. We've had a comment about planning, for example, having an underspend on salary. It would be down to the executive member to bring to the panel to say whether or not service has been impacted by that staffing difference and what the outcomes or what the mediation has been around the service provision as a result of the budget. It should never be that the finance function is holding those people to account for that side of things. It is the finance function reporting on the impact from a governance on the budget side.
Chair, does that mean that finance don't actually collect the money from because I believe they do collect the money from the councils. So, if we're continuing to collect the same money, then I believe it is a finance issue, but I'll leave it.
So an analogy might be, do you hold the checkout assistant at Tesco who is taking the money for the customer to account for the price of the goods or the cleanliness of the store? And one of the things I have said since I've taken this role has been that what we want to do is to almost to make budgets boring. The budget shouldn't be what it is that we are talking about. The budget is just a way of making sure that we are keeping the governance guardrails. And what we want is to be talking about the great services that the council are providing and the actions and activities that are happening as a result. And within that needs to be a level of delegated power into the officers to be able to run their budgets and to make those changes accordingly. Now, I think there's financial regulations and the prudent side of things is absolutely essential. And we do see, unfortunately, other councils that suffer as a result of that not being the case. Equally, what I wouldn't want is a situation where people are beholden to that finance position for absolutely everything. and have a limit if they have to go over a certain amount, that they don't have the flexibility to do that. Now, I would openly suggest that at the next budget, as we come through the budget scrutiny process, that if people consider that there are elements of that perhaps should be held in a different manner, that would be the appropriate place to take it. Because at the moment, obviously we can't make running changes to how we have decided to make this year's budget function because we are so far into the process.
I thank the portfolio holder for his answer. It wasn't my question. My question really is, and if I was Tesco's, I would hold my finance people responsible, not the checkout girl.
I think we've come to an amicable closure on that particular issue. Are there any more questions on finance paper before we move on to the next item? Thank you. Okay. We're going to move on to item 7, which is treasury management.
So I get the joy of introducing again, but with the true subject matter expert. What I would like to do, so I'll let Oliver deliver the report, but it would be interesting just to hear back from people who attended the training as to whether how useful they found it, if it's something that they think that should be repeated in a similar sort of way in the future as well. So Oliver, thank you.
Good evening. This is the Treasury report for the six months so far this year. There's 4 items that I wanted to bring attention to. One is the interest rate. At the moment, it's still holding up pretty well at 4.9%, but I've said this before, it's likely to go down. So the receipts that we're currently getting are not likely to last. So the current forecast is by September 26, so in a couple of years' time it'll be down to 3%, and it'll go down over that time in between now and then. And 3% is likely to be what it is in the longer term. So we're going to be looking at lower interest rate receipts over the next couple of years. The second thing is the borrowing. We haven't done any new borrowing. We haven't done any short-term borrowing, so the borrowing has remained the same. On the investing, we're still much the same as we've been before, using the DMO, which is the government deposit account, and we're using money market funds, which are a fund which spreads our money across many counterparties. And both the interest rates on both of those are holding up pretty well, near 5% at the moment. And the final thing I wanted just to point out was the liability benchmark graph, which is in the report. It shows our requirement for borrowing over the next 20 to 30 years. It also shows what borrowing we've got over that time. And it also shows that I think in the mid-30s, our borrowing will exceed what we require, but until that point, we're under-borrowed. Thank you very much.
Good to hear we're under borrowed. I like that. I like that phrase very much. Are there any questions? Ross, Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the report, as always, Oliver. Obviously, this report came out before the big event that happened last Wednesday, the budget. And I just wonder, since then, and reflecting back on this report, do you think there's any changes when it comes to the forecast, in particular with guild markets going up where they were in here going down, and also the predicted growth over the next 4 to 5 years being revised down by the OBR? Does that affect anything within this paper that we need to be concerned about in the next 6 months? Thank you.
Probably not the next 6 months, but I think again we're back to interest rates again. If the government's increasing its borrowing, which it looks like it's to, then it's like you say, it's going to hold up the gilt rates, which in effect is the rate that we get on the DMO or the government investment. So it's possible that it might hold the rates up a bit higher for a bit longer, but I've said that before, and it's gone on even longer, but it could do. I'm on the growth side. I'm not really sure that it'll make too much difference. It may have an impact on inflation, which again would then have an impact on interest rates, because the government or the Bank of England will be trying to hold inflation down again with using higher interest rates. But I think it's probably a bit difficult to tell so far.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. This is really a comment on the report on page 166, which is the commercial investment property summary, where we've got a value at the beginning of the year, a value at the end of the year, and a movement during the year. As these properties have been purchased at particular points in time for particular values, would it not make sense to have the original purchase cost of these properties? Then we could see over the life of the property so far how much they've gone up and come down. Otherwise, we're looking at an artificial situation, I believe, and as having worked as an accountant at UK Land, I'm very aware of how they report, and a investment in a property is looked at over the whole life of the property, and therefore it isn't sort of broken down into years, but the movement over that property. So I would like to see the original values in this report in future, and then we could see whether or not a loss of 7,000 in the current year was actually a loss on our investment in that property, because we may have had appreciation far more in previous years.
So what we have with these is it's an accounting practice rather than an actual real tangible value from a commercial, if we sold it, point of view. You would have missed, or maybe you've caught up, but we had exactly this ongoing debate with our auditors, the last audit, who changed their minds from the previous audit outturn on exactly this outcome. So I hear what you're saying. To a large extent, I agree with you. But what we are showing here is a value based on the rental income received from the property, which is the accounting practice that is expected of us, and therefore not a valuation based on commercial resale. And no matter how much you or I may disagree with that, that isn't what needs to appear in this report, down to what the auditors have instructed us to do. Now, hold that thought, because we will come to your point in a later subject.
Thank you for the clarification. That's not clear in the report, and I've never come across that form before, but thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, I would like to say, Oliver, I always enjoyed the report, and I think it was very good. And in terms of the training, I'm a bit weird. I actually enjoyed it. I actually found it really helpful, but I used to work at a bank, so it's easier for me, but perhaps open to colleagues to feedback on what they felt about the training as well.
Am I on? Yes. Thank you, Chair. I felt the training was great as far as it went. I think the level of detail in the report is at a significantly increased level of detail than what we saw in the training. And I think, I don't know whether there's a possibility or an opportunity possibly for Oliver to, because I guess the news reports sort of are, in terms of the structure of the report, they're sort of very static from year to year sort of thing, rather than, obviously not the content, and whether it would be worth just talking us through the report on a structural basis at some training session if there's an opportunity at some point. Thank you.
There's a possibility of holding another session, so I've booked in for 2 sessions. The second one is probably going to be about the strategy, so in January there'll be a treasury management strategy that goes through, and so it'll be aimed at that. But I can certainly ask if he'll do something a bit more, because he asked me this time, I gave him some ideas, so I'll ask for a bit more detail if you want.
Councillor Katner.
Thank you, Chair. Just my comment on the training, I found it very useful. I must admit I read the slides beforehand and felt a bit lost. But then when we went through it, it helped me understand things that I didn't understand because I do not have a financial background, unlike some other people on this committee. So, yes, but I thought the level was quite good for those of us who don't have that background.
Councillor Terry.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the property,
Yeah, that's fine. We'll cover that one in the next session because we'll go into a little bit more detail on aspects of that at that point. Because I don't want to, in an open forum, talk about aspects of a commercial negotiation because it tips our hands. So we'll come back to them at the next section.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions for this part of the meeting? Okay, well, at this point, we will be moving into the second stage of the meeting. I have to read this out for everyone. To resolve that the public will be excluded from the meeting because the business to be transacted contains exempt information relating to the financial and business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. And we'll be moving into that now. Thank you for the work that you've done to date. Thank you.